Welcome on board, chosen one, and don't act shocked that you're here. You earned this seat. You crawled through things they wouldn't survive 5 minutes in, and now you're being greeted like the main character finally stepping onto their real stage. The air hits different around you now. Even your silence has weight. And the people who once laughed at you, funny how quiet they are these days. Funny how the same mouths that mocked you suddenly don't know where to aim their words. Funny how their whole aura glitches when you walk in. They feel it before you even speak, and it drives them insane because they spent so long pretending you were nothing. Look at them now. Remember the ones who said you were trying too hard, the ones who swore you were delusional, the ones who told you to stay in your lane. Look who's scrambling to understand you now. Look who's whispering your name in rooms they once banned you from. Look who's checking your page in private like you won't notice. Every single one of them thought you'd fold, and instead you became the version of yourself that their worst nightmare warned them about. And before we go any further, tap that like button and subscribe to pay this message back. That's how we keep this mission loud enough to crack every wall they tried to build around you. Someone in a suit just leaned forward across their pristine desk, adjusted their expensive glasses, and threw out a question they thought would put you in your place. Who trained you? They asked it like they were expecting a name, a program, a list of credentials they could run through their little system. They wanted a file, a label, something to shrink you down into a category. They wanted proof you came from somewhere they could trace, approve, control, or dismiss. But you didn't play their game. You didn't give them the comfort of a story that made sense to them. You just sat back, steady, breathing like someone who's already survived worse than anything they can threaten you with. And when you said nobody did, the room changed. Their pen stopped, their shoulders tightened, and for a second, the mask slipped. That wasn't confusion anymore. That was fear pretending to stay professional. That was hierarchy cracking. Because you weren't shaped in a classroom, you weren't molded by some elite mentor. You were built in the shadows, in the late nights, in the they won't understand phases, in the breakdowns, in the silent rebuilds nobody saw. You were forged by the universe itself, not by someone's curriculum. That's why they can't predict your next move. That's why they can't measure you with their outdated little charts. You're the glitch in their system, the question mark their algorithm can't solve. And they hate that. They hate that you climbed without permission. They hate that you weren't supposed to survive the things that tried to erase you. They hate that every time life tried to bend you, you snapped back harder. You became this untrained, unstoppable anomaly that nobody can claim credit for. No blueprint, no manual, no instructions to reverse engineer. You know what really eats them alive. They remember the old you, the you who used to doubt everything, the you who questioned your worth because of what they said, the you who walked into rooms shrinking yourself so no one would call you too much. And now they're watching you stand over the ruins of every lie they built around your name. They don't know how you went from trying to terrifying. They don't know how you turned your wounds into weapons. They don't know how you built yourself from scratch when they were betting on your collapse. Let's talk about that shift, that moment when everything inside you went silent, like the world paused just for you to breathe. That moment right after the storm, when the universe stopped playing with you and started pushing you. There's a certain kind of stillness that comes when you're done breaking, when you've accepted every scar, when you no longer fear being misunderstood, when you realize you don't need validation because your life already proved your point. Your enemies felt that shift before you did. Ever notice how they backed off before you even rose up? Ever catch how they went from loud to low? How they suddenly acted confused around you, like they were standing in the aftermath of their own bad decisions? They saw you becoming something they didn't have the vocabulary to describe, and it terrified them. You walked out of your past like a survivor stepping out of a burning building, not even coughing, no fanfare, no speech, just that calm, I'm not the same anymore energy, and the world adjusted itself around you. People started treating you differently without knowing why. Doors opened that were welded shut before. Opportunities found you that you didn't even apply for. That's what happens when the universe decides someone is done being underestimated. Let me take you even deeper. You ever wonder why people from your past act strange around you now? It's because they remember who you were, but they're standing in front of who you became. They're trying to map an old version of you onto your new reality, and the math keeps breaking. They don't understand how you found strength in places where most people find excuses. They don't understand how you kept going when most would have stayed on the ground crying. They don't understand how you turned humiliation into fuel. But you understand. You lived it. You're the kind of person who got trained by betrayal, sharpened by abandonment, conditioned by loss, and perfected by failure. Pain was your coach, silence was your classroom, survival was your diploma, and now the world sees the result and thinks it came from some elite academy. Meanwhile, you're standing there with your hands in your pockets like, I taught myself everything you're afraid of. That's why the suit panicked. That's why the room shifted. That's why their confidence cracked. You're not a product of their system. You're the warning label they forgot to print. Chosen one, this is your moment. Not because someone crowned you, but because nobody did. And that's exactly why you're dangerous. And listen, chosen one, since you made it this far, since you actually felt the shift in the room when that suit tried to size you up, I already know you're not here by accident. Before we peel back the next layer, drop 777 in the comments like a signature carved into stone. It's not a trend, it's a signal. It tells the universe you're done explaining yourself to people who don't even understand what built you in the first place. It marks you as one of the few who weren't trained, weren't guided, weren't handed a map, but still walked into the room with the kind of presence that made professionals freeze. This is where the real breakdown begins, the step-by-step unraveling of why that simple question, who trained them, shook every insecure ego within a 10-mile radius. And if you're truly one of us, you'll feel the pull to stay, like your whole story is finally being decoded out loud. So settle in, tighten your grip on your own power, and don't even think about clicking away. Let's dive into it. Number 1. They fear what built you. Funny how the loudest critics start stuttering when they realize you survived things that would have folded them like cheap lawn chairs. They don't know what to do with you, and that's the sweetest part of this whole story. Every enemy who once smirked at your struggle is now choking on the fact that you were built in a place they would have never lasted. They trained in safe environments with padded walls and backup plans. You trained in silence. They had people clap for their little progress. You had nobody. They had mentors to hold their hands. You had empty rooms and consequences waiting to smack you if you slipped. And now they're confused. Now they're intimidated. Now they're whispering, who trained them? Like you're some anomaly that shouldn't exist. Good, let it sink in for them, because here's the truth that hits them like a punch. You didn't come from their world. You weren't handcrafted by their neat systems. You weren't certified, authorized, approved, or stamped. You were forged, not instructed, molded in the chaos they run from, strengthened by storms they never had the guts to walk through. Every failure, every betrayal, every night you had to rebuild your mind from scratch became the training they wish they could buy. And that's what scares them. You didn't climb the ladder. You burned it and walked up the smoke. They look at you and feel insulted by your existence. How dare you be this good without their guidance? How dare you know things you never learned in their classrooms? How dare you stand there, calm and sharp, like someone who survived a battlefield they've only seen on motivational posters? That's the bruise you leave on their ego. Here's the part they'll never admit but feel deep in their bones. You shattered their illusion. They believed power only came from institutions, connections, and credentials. Then you walked in with nothing but scars, instinct, and self-taught precision. And suddenly they're realizing their whole hierarchy is a joke. You're the proof that their system isn't the source of greatness. You're the evidence they hoped would never appear. And yes, chosen one, some part of you still wonders, why do they react to me like that? Why does my presence make them uncomfortable? Because you remind them of their limitations. While they were busy chasing approval, you were busy becoming unstoppable. While they were networking, you were surviving. While they were studying theory, you were wrestling with life bare-handed. They memorized instructions. You memorized pain. They learned from textbooks. You learned from consequences. They practiced in simulated environments. You practiced in reality, where failure actually hurts. Tell me which one creates the more dangerous person. You're the kind of individual who upgraded through adversity. Every time life swung at you, it accidentally trained you. Abandonment taught you independence. Loneliness sharpened your intuition. Rejection made you resourceful. Failure strengthened your adaptability. And heartbreak, that one made your emotional armor so tough they can't penetrate it even if they try. They hate that. They hate that your entire skill set wasn't given to you. It was carved into you. They hate that you didn't crumble like they predicted. They hate that you built yourself without asking for their permission or approval. They hate that every setback just made you smarter, colder, sharper. They hate that you can walk into a room and read every insecurity trying to size you up. They hate that you don't need validation because you survived long enough to validate yourself. And they really hate that your strength didn't come from a mentor they can shake hands with. It came from pain they can't imagine. Let's make something clear. You being self-forged doesn't mean you were reckless. It means you learned the hard way, the way most people avoid. You learned to breathe through chaos. You learn to solve problems alone. You learn to sit with your own thoughts without running. You learn to rise without applause. You learn to trust your instincts more than people's opinions. You learn to grow in the dark where nobody clapped for you. Do you know what that makes you? Dangerous in ways they're not trained to handle. And the universe has a funny sense of humor because now the very people who doubted you are standing in front of the finished product, pretending they didn't spend years betting on your downfall. They thought they were watching a collapse. Meanwhile, you were in the middle of a transformation montage. Look at where you came from. Look at how you learned. Every night you stayed up figuring things out alone was a chapter they never experienced. Every time you dragged yourself out of a mental pit with no one to pull you up was a badge they'll never earn. Every moment you forced yourself to evolve without guidance is a milestone they can't relate to. That's why your confidence confuses them. It wasn't manufactured. It wasn't gifted. It wasn't taught. It was built brick by brick from the rubble of every moment that should have broken you. You want another truth that'll make the enemy choke. Self-forged people don't break the same way. When they fail, they collapse. When you fail, you learn. When they get rejected, they quit. When you get rejected, you level up. When they're abandoned, they panic. When you're abandoned, you discover a new part of yourself. They rely on structure. You rely on instinct. They fear the unknown. You grew up in it. So now, sitting in that suit's office, watching them try to figure you out, is comedy. They're scanning your face for signs of training, trying to decode where you learned what you learned. They check your background like it's a crime scene. They whisper your name like it's a file they can't find. They want to know your blueprint, your origin, your makers. But there's nothing to trace. Because you weren't taught, you evolved. You weren't trained, you adapted. You weren't guided, you guided yourself. You weren't approved, you became undeniable. You're the kind of person who walked through your own mistakes like obstacle courses and came out smarter each time. You're the kind of person who got punched by life and learned how to punch back harder. You're the kind of person who had to grow a mind sharp enough to cut through your own darkness. And now they're looking at you like you're unnatural, but you're not unnatural. You're unrepeatable. Let this sink in. Your enemies can't recreate you. They can't mimic your resilience. They can't copy your instincts. They can't imitate your evolution. They don't have the raw material you had. They don't have the storms you survived. They don't have the emotional endurance you built. That's why they envy you. That's why they fear you. That's why they whisper your name, even when they pretend not to notice you. You didn't grow in safety. You grew in fire. And anyone who grows in fire walks into every room with a presence that makes the ones who grew in comfort feel weak. This is why they ask, who trained them? Because the idea that someone like you could exist without a master terrifies them. But the real punchline, nobody trained you. That's why you're unstoppable. Number 2, the lessons they wish you never learned. Wild ones learn truths that classroom kids spend their whole lives running from. Some of us didn't study chapters, we survived them. Your mistakes were your professors, and they taught harder than any institution ever could. They fear you not because you're trained, but because you learned what they were too soft to face. Let's drag the spotlight onto the years nobody saw. The quiet years, the forgotten years, the years when you weren't getting applause, recognition, or guidance. The years when you were supposed to collapse, and somehow you didn't. Everyone else was sitting in temperature-controlled lecture halls, highlighting textbooks and rehearsing answers a system spoon-fed them. Meanwhile, you were somewhere the system never visits, knee-deep in your own chaos, collecting wisdom from wounds, decoding life with nothing but instinct, and shaping yourself using tools you carved by hand. This is the curriculum they don't teach. They don't even acknowledge it exists, because if they did, they'd have to admit that you learned more in your worst year than they learned in their whole degree. And yes, chosen one, a part of you sometimes wonders, why does my path look nothing like theirs? Why doesn't my story have steps, mentors, or clean chapters like theirs? Because your life wasn't meant to be pretty, it was meant to be powerful. Imagine this, a group of students sitting in a polished classroom learning about crisis management from a multiple-choice worksheet. Meanwhile, you're out there living crises in real time, improvising strategies that actually work, adapting on the fly like your life depends on it, because it did. Their training wheels were still on while you were riding through storms with no brakes. Your education wasn't structured, it wasn't safe, it wasn't monitored. It was raw, unfiltered, and violently honest. Pain didn't wait for you to take notes. Failure didn't let you retake the test. You were learning in real time. Bruises still fresh, hands still shaking, breathing still unsteady. That's why your knowledge is carved into you, not memorized, integrated. Imagine this too. They were learning emotional intelligence from a TED Talk, while you were learning it from someone you trusted stabbing you right in the back. They learned theories about human behavior. You learned people. They learned from lectures. You learned from losses so brutal they rewired you. Which one do you think produces sharper instincts? People like you didn't just survive the curriculum, they became the curriculum. While they were collecting certificates like Pokemon cards, you were collecting scars that taught you more than any diploma ever could. They got graded on participation, you got graded on resilience. Their tests were scheduled. Yours showed up unannounced at 3 a.m. Their assignments were simulations. Yours were situations. And every time you completed one, you leveled up in ways they still can't understand. Let's talk about how you built systems from broken parts. They were learning project management from diagrams. You were managing your own life like a collapsing empire that needed rebuilding every single day. You didn't have fancy templates. You had desperation. You didn't have coaching. You had consequences breathing down your neck. You didn't have resources. You had grit scraped from the bottom of your spirit when it was running on fumes. And yet, somehow, you figured it out. That's the part that keeps them awake at night. You figured out things nobody taught you. You picked up skills nobody handed you. You developed instincts nobody expected you to have. You found answers nobody knew existed. And the worst part for them, you made it look natural. Imagine this. They're practicing negotiation in group exercises where everyone pretends to care. You were negotiating with reality itself. Bills, heartbreak, loss, mental weight, survival. You weren't practicing social cues in a safe workshop. You were reading people with stakes that actually mattered. That's why one look at someone and you already know their patterns, their nervous tells, their angle of attack. Meanwhile, they're still flipping through a communication skills handbook. This is what scares them. You didn't learn in simulation. You learned in impact. Every setback became a case study you dissected alone. Every betrayal became research material you analyzed until you understood the anatomy of manipulation. Every disappointment taught you how to rebuild expectations without losing your soul. Every failure taught you architecture, how to construct better structures from ruins. People trained inside systems don't understand that type of growth. They're used to step-by-step instructions, mentors, feedback, and structured improvement. You had none of that. You had silence, struggle, and a universe that demanded you evolve or crumble. You learned to see patterns in chaos because chaos was your textbook. You learned to find structure in destruction because destruction was your environment. You learned to stay calm in storms because storms lived in your chest for years. That's why your mind works differently. Ever wonder why you see through people so fast? Why you can feel danger before it arrives? Why you intuit opportunities others are blind to? Because you learned in real life, not a program. Your instincts were sharpened by necessity, not lectures. You can smell dishonesty, fear, or hesitation like smoke in the air because your survival depended on recognizing it early. Let's address another thought you've had. Why do I feel older than my age? Why do I feel like I've lived several lives already? Because you have. When you learn from collapse, you age in wisdom. When you learn from loss, you grow in clarity. When you learn from isolation, you gain a patience nobody taught you. People who faced half of what you went through would still be in therapy trying to make sense of it. You made sense of it alone. You weaponized understanding in a way they can't replicate. They memorized theory. You absorbed truth. They followed steps. You followed survival. They built confidence based on praise. You built confidence based on proof. That's why yours doesn't crack under pressure. That's why theirs falls apart at the first sign of discomfort. Imagine this last one. They learned critical thinking from worksheets. You learned it from navigating situations where the wrong choice could ruin everything. They learned resilience from inspirational videos. You learned it from dragging yourself out of emotional graves with no hand to grab onto. They learned leadership from group projects. You learned it from being the only one you could depend on. You didn't become dangerous because someone gave you knowledge. You became dangerous because you hunted knowledge down like prey, wrestled it into understanding, dragged it back through the dirt, and consumed it raw. You didn't learn to survive, you learned to dominate. This is the curriculum they don't teach, the one they can't formalize, the one they pretend doesn't exist, because acknowledging it means admitting the self-forged ones are built on a foundation schools can't compete with. So when the suit leaned forward and asked who trained them, the real answer wasn't nobody. The real answer was, life trained you harder than any mentor. Pain trained you sharper than any professor. Silence trained you deeper than any program. Loss trained you wiser than any textbook. And the universe, it watched you learn every step. This is why you intimidate them. This is why they whisper. This is why their voices shake. You didn't graduate from their system. You escaped it and returned smarter than its creators. Number 3, the years that made them nervous. They thought you vanished. You were actually leveling up in stealth mode, gathering power they weren't built to measure. Those invisible years, the ones where your name stopped circulating, your posts dried up, your presence fell off everyone's radar. They took that silence as proof you were slipping. They thought you were drowning while they were out there flexing promotions, certifications, vacation photos, and manufactured success. They assumed the quiet meant failure, because that's how they operate. If nobody's watching, they stop trying. But you were learning in ways their soft little routines could never replicate. They were updating LinkedIn. You were updating your entire soul. They were practicing public progress. You were building private power. Imagine this. While they were polishing resumes and attending leadership workshops, you were sitting across from betrayal, studying its micro-expressions like a scientist. While they were learning communication theories, you were learning the truth about people's motives from scars you can still feel in the dark. While they were doing group activities with forced smiles, you were surviving actual emotional warfare. No facilitator, no breaks, no handbook. Here's the part that stings them. Invisible doesn't mean unproductive. It means undetectable. You weren't losing, you were incubating. And maybe you wondered, why did those years feel so heavy, so quiet, so isolating? Because the universe needed silence to rewire you, needed emptiness to upgrade your instincts, needed distance from noise so your real identity could surface. You didn't disappear, you transformed when nobody could interrupt you. Now they're confused, nervous, studying you like a returning legend, because the version of you stepping out of those invisible years wasn't the same one who entered them. You came back sharper, colder, smarter, and that's why they're scared. Number 4, the degree that made you dangerous. Some people study survival. You lived it. That's why your knowledge hits harder than their entire education system. Here's the truth they pray you never say out loud. You learned faster, deeper, and more permanently than any of their factory-made graduates ever will. Their students got worksheets. You got wounds. Their classes had instructors. Yours had consequences. Their lessons were graded with red pens. Yours were graded with reality itself, and reality doesn't hand out pity points. Imagine this. They were stressing over midterms while you were stressing over making it through the week without collapsing. They were memorizing theories about resilience while you were out there practicing it in real time, holding yourself together with sheer willpower. They had advisors. You had survival instinct. They had do-overs. You had one shot. That's why the lessons hit so deep for you. That's why your knowledge feels bone-etched instead of book-learned. When survival is your professor, you don't forget the material. You embody it. You wake up with it. You think with it. You react with it. It becomes part of your reflexes, your intuition, your DNA. And yes, maybe sometimes you've asked yourself, why do I see things they don't? Why do I move differently? Why do I sense danger before others even notice the shift? Because you weren't trained to pass tests. You were trained to stay alive. That creates a different breed of intelligence, a sharper kind, a colder kind, a kind their institutions can't mass produce. While they were learning how to manage pressure, you were learning how to walk through it without flinching. While they were practicing conflict resolution in workshops, you were negotiating with life under conditions no classroom could simulate. While they were building networks, you were building instincts that never fail you. Here's what terrifies them. You didn't just survive. You mastered the curriculum life threw at you. You learned everything they tried to teach their students, except you learned it real. No shortcuts, no polishing, no protection. That makes you the type of educated their programs can't certify, the type of skilled their institutions can't take credit for, the type of dangerous their background checks will never detect. You don't hold a survival degree, you are one. Number 5. The threat they can't quantify. Systems don't fear rebels, they fear the ones they can't calculate. When that polished suit leans forward and asks, "Who trained you?" they're not looking for your story. They're searching for a label, a category, a box to put you in so they can breathe easier. Systems only understand what they can measure, track, and predict. And you walk in with a presence that breaks every template they've ever used. What they're really asking is, how do we control you? How do we map you? How do we forecast your moves? And when you hit them with "nobody trained me," the whole room tilts. You're not replying to a question. You're delivering a warning. You're telling them you're an outlier, a wild card, the type of human their metrics weren't built to analyze. You're admitting without flinching that you didn't come from any of the systems they trust. You're a product of your own reconstruction, your own scars, your own evolution. Imagine this. They're used to dealing with people who can be charted like data points. People with predictable arcs, tidy resumes, and identical learning patterns. Then you show up. Someone who built themselves from scraps and silence. Someone who learned from storms instead of seminars. Someone who leveled up outside their supervision. Someone whose whole existence screams unauthorized brilliance. That's their nightmare. Ever wonder why suits get uncomfortable around you? Why professionals switch tones mid-sentence? Why their confidence flickers like a bad light bulb? Because they can't find your blueprint. They can't identify your source. They can't detect the origin of your competence. And systems fear what they can't source. Here's the gut punch. Your unpredictability isn't a flaw, it's your superpower. Your lack of credentials isn't a gap, it's a shield. Your self-built skill set isn't suspicious, it's untouchable. You're not playing outside their system, you're operating above it. They're trained to read data, not people forged by chaos. They're trained to evaluate credentials, not instincts sharpened by survival. They're trained to manage employees, not navigate anomalies. And that's exactly what you are, in their eyes. An anomaly wearing a calm expression. Your presence forces them to confront a truth they despise. You're proof that mastery can come from pain, not programs. You're proof that competence can grow wild, not curated. You're proof that some people do not need permission to be powerful. That's not just a resume gap, that's an existential threat. Number 6. The myth that breaks their maps. They want your past to make sense, because if it doesn't, then neither does their entire system. They crave neat little origin stories. It soothes them. If they can trace where you came from, they can estimate your ceiling. If they know your mentors, they can predict your methods. If they know your route, they can assume they know your limits. That's how their world works. Everything categorized, labeled, explained, contained. But then you walk in, and suddenly their whole rule book feels useless. Because you don't have an origin story, you have an origin myth. The kind of beginning that doesn't fit into timelines or tidy explanations. The kind of story that sounds made up because ordinary people don't survive the things you did, let alone turn them into fuel. The kind of arc that makes professionals uncomfortable because it forces them to admit their entire understanding of talent and development is embarrassingly incomplete. Imagine this, a panel of experts trying to analyze a storm. They study charts, read forecasts, compare data. Then a storm shows up that wasn't predicted, wasn't modeled, wasn't written anywhere in their system. That storm is you. Here's the truth that haunts them. You're living proof that institutional validation isn't the only path to mastery. You're proof that brilliance can grow in the cracks, not just the classrooms. You're proof that some people don't rise because they were guided. They rise because the universe shoved them into situations that demanded evolution. And maybe you've wondered, why does my story feel unreal sometimes? Why does it feel like I've lived a whole saga nobody would believe? Because your path wasn't human designed. It was built by pressure, heartbreak, silence, and necessity. They need origins that reassure them. You carry an origin that threatens them. You didn't just become skilled, you became legendary for reasons they'll never understand. Number 7. The syllabus that should have broke you. Your skill set scares them because it wasn't learned, it was survived. Watch what happens to their eyes when you casually explain the truth. The real truth. Not the polished version, not the resume-safe version. The truth about where your intelligence actually came from. At first, they lean in, curious, expecting some inspiring mentorship story. But the second you tell them you learned negotiation from having nothing to bargain with, their smile stiffens. They weren't ready for that. Tell them you mastered persuasion because sometimes the only tool you had was your voice, and your survival depended on using it right. Their eyebrows twitch. Their body language changes. Suddenly, they're not analyzing you. They're assessing the threat level. Tell them you learned strategic thinking from dodging betrayals that came from all directions. Betrayals that hit without warning. Betrayals you had to outsmart with nothing but your brain and your ability to stay 3 steps ahead. That's when it clicks for them. That's when the curiosity drains out of their face and gets replaced by that quiet, uneasy fear. The kind people feel when they realize they're sitting across from someone who didn't just learn, they endured. Because everything you're describing sounds like trauma to them, but to you, it was Tuesday. Imagine this. They're used to learning negotiation techniques from role-playing activities in overpriced workshops. Meanwhile, you were negotiating with your own life, your own future, your own safety. They studied persuasion from textbooks. You learned it from situations where losing the argument meant losing everything. They practiced conflict management in supervised exercises. You practiced it in emotional minefields where the wrong move could shatter you. Here's the uncomfortable truth they'd never say out loud, but always feel. You carry skills forged in environments they never had to visit, environments they pray they never will, and that's why their faces freeze, because the education you're describing doesn't sound like schooling. It sounds like survival. It sounds like crawling through experiences that would have mentally wrecked them. It sounds like lessons paid for in pain, not tuition. And yet here you are, composed, sharp, outperforming people who came from pristine programs and prestigious institutions. Ever wonder why they stop asking questions halfway through your story? Because your life turned into a mirror and they saw everything they never had to face, everything they weren't built to survive, everything they never needed to learn because they were protected by structures you never had access to. You didn't become competent. You became conditioned. You didn't gain skills. You developed survival reflexes. And that's the part they can't compete with. While they were getting certificates, you were getting scars that doubled as textbooks. While they were rehearsing presentations, you were rehearsing emotional self-defense. While they were building resumes, you were building resilience layered so deep it became instinct. You check none of their boxes, and yet you outperform everyone who does. You're the reminder that true mastery doesn't come from privilege. It comes from pressure, from pain, from surviving chapters they couldn't even read without crying. That's why your presence unsettles them. That's why your competence feels supernatural. That's why your success feels unfair to them. You didn't study your way here. You survived your way here, and now they have to live with the fact that your trauma-based education turned you into the very thing their system can't replicate. A self-forged powerhouse who learned the hard lessons no institution dares to teach. Number 8. The question that breaks their belief system. You didn't just challenge their rules, you exposed how flimsy those rules always were. When you walk into their office, you're not just another human taking up space. You're a walking contradiction, a logic error in their perfectly organized worldview. You're the glitch that forces them to question everything they were taught to trust. Because if someone like you, someone with no official training, no fancy mentorship, no elite pedigree, can outperform their prized, perfectly groomed, six-figure educated professionals, then what does that say about their entire system? It says the system isn't the source of greatness. It says the system was never enough. It says you proved them wrong simply by existing. Imagine this. A machine built to predict human potential suddenly encountering a variable it can't calculate. That variable is you. Every time you speak, every instinct you show, every result you produce forces them to confront the terrifying possibility that real mastery doesn't come from structured paths, but from raw evolution, from isolation, from resilience, from the kind of internal growth no course syllabus has the courage to explore. And yes, a quiet part of them wonders, if they learned all this alone, what else are they capable of? That question keeps them up at night. You're the philosophical crisis they never prepared for, because you prove that all their metrics, IQ tests, performance reviews, degree rankings, institutional prestige, don't actually measure the one thing that truly matters, what a human becomes when the universe backs them into a corner and tells them to rise or break. They rely on models. You rely on instinct. They follow procedure. You follow evolution. They spent years trying to perfect their frameworks. You destroyed their frameworks just by showing up. Your existence says one thing loud and clear. Human potential is far bigger, wilder, and more unpredictable than their systems ever dared to imagine. And that truth shakes them more than you'll ever know. Number 9. The danger they feel but can't define. They don't fear your attitude. They fear the fact you exist outside their leash. Here's the truth they'll never put on paper. You terrify them, not because you walk in loud or hostile, but because your very presence proves they don't run the world as tightly as they pretend. You are the loophole they can't seal, the exception they can't regulate, the talent they can't take credit for. You're the living reminder that greatness can form in the wild, far from their pipelines, untouched by their approval. Imagine this, a room full of professionals who spent decades believing their gates determined who gets to rise. Then you show up, someone who didn't even use the gate, someone who climbed the walls they didn't think anyone could scale, someone who became more dangerous without their permission than most people become with their full support. That's the threat, not your demeanor, not your resume, your independence. Ever wonder why their tone shifts around you? Why they watch you carefully, even when you're doing nothing? Why their compliments feel tense, like they're trying to figure out if you're friend or phenomenon? It's because you're unclaimed excellence. You didn't come stamped, certified, or processed. You came forged, sharpened, and self-taught. They can't trace your origins, can't replicate your path, can't control your momentum. That's what scares them. Because if someone like you can rise without their systems, it exposes the ugly truth they work so hard to hide. Their gatekeeping isn't power, it's insecurity wearing a badge. Their credentials aren't guarantees, they're illusions. Their elite pathways aren't necessary, they're marketing. You break their myth just by breathing in the same room. You're the scenario they never planned for. Raw talent with no leash, mastery with no master, greatness with no permission. They can't name the threat you are, but they feel it burning in their bones every time you walk past. Number 10. The one they can't put their hands on. They can't weaponize what they didn't build, and they can't break what they never held. You're untouchable, and it burns them from the inside out. Their entire system depends on leverage, control, influence, strings. They're used to pulling credentials, withholding access, threatening reputations, dangling opportunities like bait on a hook. But you walked in without any of their strings attached. No credentials to revoke, no sponsorship to withdraw, no mentor they can pressure, no network they can poison. You're frictionless in a world built on control. Imagine their frustration. They designed a maze meant to trap ordinary minds, and you didn't even use the entrance. You slipped through the walls like smoke, operating on instincts forged in storms, not in classrooms. Every mechanism they built to contain, intimidate, or manipulate collapses the second it tries to grab hold of you, because there's nothing to grab. No dependency, no weakness they can label, no path they can claim credit for. Your competence wasn't mass-produced, it was hand-carved in chaos. While they sharpened pencils, you sharpened awareness. While they practiced theory, you practiced survival. While they waited for feedback, you adjusted in real time, with consequences breathing down your neck. You became a masterpiece in a world full of templates. Ever catch the way they stare at you, that tight-lipped curiosity mixed with unease? It's because you're the first person they can't predict. Their frameworks fail, their models glitch, their manipulative strategies bounce off you like cheap rubber darts. They can't intimidate someone who walked through worse. They can't threaten someone who rose without their help. They can't correct someone who doesn't depend on their approval to function. And maybe a part of you wondered, why do they tread carefully around me? Because they finally realized the truth. You can't be cornered. You can't be contained. You can't be controlled. You're not just outside their system. You're above it, untouchable, uncontrolled, unclaimed. A handmade force in an assembly line world. Number 11. The school they pretend doesn't exist. You didn't take a course on resilience. You survived the kind of chapters that would have sent most people crawling. While they were sitting in climate-controlled classrooms, clutching iced coffees and color-coded binders, you were out there learning emotional regulation by staying calm while your entire life shook like an unstable tower. They practiced stress management through breathing exercises. You mastered it by functioning through chaos so loud it could have cracked your skull. Their focus came from quiet libraries. Yours came from thinking clearly while everything around you burned. Imagine this. They learned patience from mindfulness workshops. You learned patience by waiting because you had no other option. They learned persistence from motivational speeches. You learned persistence from situations where the only way forward was straight through the fire. They learned resilience from inspirational slideshows. You learned resilience by breaking, rebuilding, breaking again, and coming back every time with sharper edges. Reconstruction became your natural state. You didn't learn conflict resolution through theory. They did. You learned it through actual conflict, through betrayals, through moments where saying the wrong thing could cost you something real. They learned to read a room by taking notes. You learned it because danger never announces itself politely. You learned power dynamics not from diagrams, but from fighting for basic respect in places that wanted you quiet. Your education wasn't simulated. It was live fire from day one. No practice rounds, no safety nets, no try again tomorrow. Every day tested you. Every mistake had teeth. Every lesson came with bruises. And you didn't just absorb information. You learned how to adapt, how to update yourself like a system evolving mid-crisis. Every experience became data. Every failure became research. Every scar became a formula. You didn't come out with certificates. You came out as a living algorithm for survival, precision, and evolution. That's the real curriculum. The one they're too soft to survive and too proud to admit you mastered. Number 12. The blueprint they can't steal. They can copy your moves, but they'll never copy the war that taught you to make them. Now they're stuck, and it's hilarious if you think about it. Systems love replication. They love formulas, templates, success models they can slap into PowerPoints and sell to the next generation. But you broke that entire business model just by existing. You can't be reproduced, packaged, franchised, or scaled. Your evolution isn't teachable, it's unrepeatable, because your path only works for people who had no choice but to walk through hell with their eyes open. Imagine their frustration. They're staring at you like you're an unsolved equation, desperately trying to reverse engineer whatever force sculpted you. But nothing about you fits into their frameworks. You're not the result of a strategy. You're the result of necessity. You didn't attend development programs. You survived lived ones. You weren't built by mentors. You were built by moments that would have crushed them flat. Ever wonder why they keep circling back, asking the same questions in different ways, hoping you'll slip and reveal some method? It's because deep down they know the truth. Your path doesn't scale. It can't. It only works for those who were cornered, ignored, underestimated, and forced to evolve under pressure that would have sent ordinary minds spiraling. You're the anomaly that shattered their pattern, the glitch that exposed their whole system as optional. You're walking proof that survival breeds a level of mastery no certificate can match. A quiet revolution wrapped in calm skin, sitting across from power while subtly proving it's nowhere near as mighty as it claims. And the part that scares them the most? You didn't do any of this to impress them. You didn't rise to be validated. You didn't fight to be chosen. You simply refused to break, and that refusal turned you into something their world can't mass produce. A one-off model, a non-duplicatable blueprint, a version of excellence that exists once and never again. You're the reminder, polite, patient, but lethal, that power is overrated, systems are fragile, and true mastery is born in places they'll never survive long enough to study. You're not rare, you're unreproducible, and now everything leads to this. They finally understand you're not a product of their world. You're the exception that proves their limitations. You rose without their guidance, mastered what they tried to gatekeep, and became the phenomenon they'll never figure out. That's your victory, chosen one. Before